Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart Gaming. Today I have another mostly spoiler-free review of a new game in an old series, Fire Emblem Engage for the Nintendo Switch, and wow do I have some opinions on this one. So sit back, grab a snack, and get ready to click that dislike button. Well, hopefully not that last thing, but we'll see. Fire Emblem Engage for the Nintendo Switch is the latest entry in Nintendo's long-running strategy RPG franchise. For the uninitiated, Fire Emblem originated on the Famicom in Japan as a 2D strategy RPG. It was one of the earlier examples of the genre on game consoles at the time. The pace of the original entry was practically glacial, but since it was so new and fresh for console gamers in Japan, it eventually became a success. Sequels appeared on the Famicom, Super Famicom, Game Boy Advance, GameCube, DS, 3DS, and, as you can see here today, the Nintendo Switch. In the 16-bit era and beyond, the Fire Emblem games often included long, dramatic stories with sometimes really surprising twists and turns. They were also particularly well known for making permadeath a major feature. Characters who died in battle were gone forever. Permadeath became a divisive feature both among Fire Emblem staff and fans. In later games, it was made optional. The series almost died a slow death after a string of commercial disappointments, but came roaring back to prominence with Fire Emblem Awakening on 3DS. Releases have continued fairly steadily since then. The last game in the series before Engage was Fire Emblem Three Houses, also on the Switch. Fire Emblem Three Houses did some new things for the series and placed a much greater emphasis on what players could do between battles rather than just in them. It was during this time that you increased character stats and relationships. Fire Emblem Engage retains a lot of that, so if you enjoyed that part of the last game, well, you might like what Engage does. It's not quite as detailed, and eventually these interstitial scenes become a chore that you'll likely want to ignore, but there's plenty to do. The combat itself, much like the last game, is still as great and, no pun intended, engaging as it's always been. The gameplay is essentially classic Fire Emblem with just a new twist or two thrown in. The primary new twist is how your playable characters can team up with special characters called emblems through which they learn new skills. Whether you're new to the series or a Fire Emblem veteran, you'll most likely dig the combat in this game. It's as fast and fluid as it's ever been, and is by far the strongest element of Fire Emblem Engage. It's a tad more forgiving than some of the past entries in the series. It employs the expected weapon and magic triangles, where characters equipped with one specific weapon or magic type are weak against another. A few characters also have special weaknesses, such as flying characters being weak against arrows or armored characters being weak against magic. Most of the strategy from Engage comes from exploiting the enemy's weaknesses while shoring up your own to protect your key characters. Maps are typically either won by defeating all enemies or by defeating the enemy leader. Occasionally the game mixes things up a little bit with a different victory condition, like moving a specific character to a specific square on the map. But these special victory conditions are few and far between. Most of the time you'll either be killing everything or the enemy leader. Now your characters will be strengthened by moving them next to other characters they've formed relationships with both during and outside of battle. When characters reach a level requirement and get a particular item, you can change their class, which will improve their base stats and their growth rates as they level up. Also, this game lets characters change to other classes or even rechange to the same class, so they can keep getting stronger after reaching the level cap for a class, which for the vast majority of classes would be level 20. All of this is about perfectly executed in Fire Emblem Engage, and the combat is extremely satisfying. I really enjoyed it, and from a gameplay standpoint, these scenes alone are some of the best in the series. Fire Emblem Engage also employs a rewind feature, where if you make a mistake, you can jump back pretty much any number of turns to fix that mistake and continue on from there, rather than being dealt a soul-crushing game over after spending a long time in a battle. This is a welcome feature and a huge time saver for when stuff goes sideways in combat, which will probably happen to you at least once or twice during the game. And I'll add that this rewinding feature is optional. If you want to be hardcore and not use it, you don't have to. As far as the game's structure, you'll travel along a world map in this game and can take part in its main story battles, optional paralogue side stories, training battles, and skirmishes, the latter two of which are useful particularly if you want to power up weaker characters. There's basically never a point in this game where you'll run out of stuff to do. However, the question becomes, will you want to do all the stuff that Fire Emblem Engage offers? If this review were strictly about the combat mechanics and the fun you can have during that part of the game, hey, Fire Emblem Engage would score a 9 or maybe even possibly a 10. But there's a lot of other things to discuss here. As in Fire Emblem Three Houses, between battles, you have a central town location where you'll spend time picking up objects, talking to characters, and increasing your relationship stats with them. In this game, it's also when you'll power up abilities and the emblem rings that you collect throughout. At first, it's pretty engrossing and everything seems fine. There's even a few mini-games you can play to boost stats temporarily before your next battle. The problem is, well, I hit a point roughly about 30 hours or so into Engage where I just got completely sick of all of this and did my best to rush through it just to get to the next battle. I had it down to a science where I wouldn't spend maybe more than 2 minutes between fights unless I needed to go power up characters or buy some stuff. It's not great that this stuff is so pointless that you won't feel like doing it anymore less than halfway through the game. After you win a battle, you can run around the field and talk to characters and pick up more loose items. Again, it was novel early on, but it's a concept that wears thin fast, especially since you can automatically gather all the relationship points without having to actually talk to anybody. When you exit the exploration scene, any relationship points you failed to collect are gathered automatically. And finally, those optional map battles I mentioned a while back, they're sort of a double-edged sword. They take place on maps you've already completed. Some of them will get you rewards like a little extra experience or money or maybe some extra items that are likely to show up in the field afterwards. Some give you nothing. If you spend too much time doing these things though, your character's strength will outpace the story missions and you'll blow through the story missions easily with no challenge at all. These aspects of the title unfortunately drop the overall quality of Engage down a little bit, but not nearly as much as the next thing we have to discuss, which requires its own section. Fire Emblem has a pretty rich history. Some of the games have had intense and surprising stories. Two entries in the series that really stand out, Genealogy of the Holy War on Super Famicom and Path of Radiance on the GameCube, told intricate tales with sometimes dark subject matter that was handled primarily in an adult way. While anyone could play and enjoy those games, the story really helped elevate these two particular titles, and it's no coincidence that it's these two games that are most often mentioned as fans' favorite entries in the series. Fire Emblem Engage completely drops the ball when it comes to story. It fails so hard, so spectacularly, that it's difficult to even put into words just how terrible the story of this game is. But hey, since that's part of why you're here and all, I guess I'll try. In literary terms, if we were to equate, say, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance to Moby Dick, then Fire Emblem Engage is the back of a bubblegum wrapper. It's that stark a contrast. Engage's story is practically an afterthought. It's like a cross between the dumb stories you see in mobile games and the worst fanfiction you ever read. Now, while I'm trying to keep this spoiler-free, you should already know that this game brings in characters from multiple prior Fire Emblem games. If you haven't played those games, you won't get the significance of those characters. Their only real purpose, however, is to act as fan service for longtime series enthusiasts. They really don't play any part at all in the overall plot of the game, they're just kinda there, and it's super weird. And the overall plot couldn't be simpler or more generic if it tried. If you've played any JRPG in the last 40 years, you pretty much know the entire plot already. Engage does practically nothing original, and I guessed its quote-unquote big twist about 5 minutes in. On the plus side, you may find some of the characters endearing and enjoy some of the relationship building that happens. That stuff is pretty standard for any modern Fire Emblem game, and I didn't find it personally all that compelling. But I will say at least it was better than the main story, which is not difficult. I can say that Fire Emblem Engage has the worst story in the entire series to date. When it comes to visuals, I'll give Engage its due. The super clean and well-defined anime style of the characters looks great. The environments, on the other hand, are often flat and lack any real detail. But on the whole, it looks nice and rectifies some of the frame rate issues seen in the last entry in the series, Three Houses. Fire Emblem Engage pretty much always runs at 30 frames per second. Visually, the only other thing really worth pointing out is that they've removed anti-aliasing from this game, so occasionally you'll see shimmering or like stair steps on some textures. There are also some pre-recorded full-motion video segments, and they look great, better than the main game, and you'll be able to pick them out easily from the main game. But overall, the look is good, if not a little bit flawed in some ways. As far as music goes, what's here in Engage is pretty good most of the time, but it lacks personality and really is kind of forgettable. There are one or two music tracks that stand out, and all of the music is clearly well made. But I finished this game a few weeks ago at this point, and I can only remember maybe 2 or 3 songs from the entire thing. And coming from me, someone who composes game music as a side gig these days, and really loves game music throughout the last 40 years, that's kind of a letdown. Now again, I want to stress it's not bad. You're not going to hear the game and want to turn the volume down or anything like that, but the music is just kinda there. As far as the voice acting in this game goes, it's generally alright. Most characters are pretty well done, but there are 1 or 2 of them who are just supremely annoying.
Time to open up shop!
To the point where I really didn't even want to do their relationship building scenes because I didn't want to hear their fingernails on a chalkboard level voice acting. So while the vast majority of the voice acting is fine, there's a couple of characters that should have never made it into the finished product. Alrighty, let's wrap this up. So in the end, just how is Fire Emblem Engage as a complete package? There's so much to consider here, but I'll briefly sum it all up and give you my review score. The strategic combat in Engage is really great, and as I said earlier, some of the best in the series, so major thumbs up there. The stuff outside of combat is pretty dull, and nothing much ever happens to really shake it up throughout the course of the entire adventure. The story is an atrocious mess, and pretty much the worst of any game in the entire Fire Emblem series since its inception. The graphics are pretty good in the end, with great looking characters but kinda bland backgrounds. The sound is likewise pretty good, with some well produced music, even though a lot of it is not very memorable. And the voice acting is mostly pretty good, but there are some characters that are just horrendous. So that's quite a mishmash of good and bad. In the end, I feel like I have to give this game a 7 out of 10. Sure, the gameplay counts the most, and frankly, it's the only thing that saves this title from a much lower score. If Intelligent Systems and Nintendo had messed up the combat in this entry, this game would be a complete and utter disaster. Story is an important component in a long strategy RPG like Fire Emblem Engage, and screwing it up this badly is just inexcusable. I feel like it was worth knocking 2 points off the total score for the terrible story alone. And finally, the dull interstitial stuff, along with, some of the minor issues with the graphics and sound, knocked off another point. So in the end, that's how I arrived at a 7 out of 10. Long-term series fans may enjoy seeing some of their favorite heroes from past games. It's just that when they're here with no real purpose, I have to ask, what is the point? Especially since if you want to play them in something where they're totally out of place, you can just always do that in the mobile game Fire Emblem Heroes. Now personally, I feel like Fire Emblem Engage is worth playing, but having experienced it, I would just suggest waiting for the eventual price cut. I know Nintendo doesn't cut games often, but I have a feeling this one is going to end up being one of the rare exceptions. Fire Emblem Engage hasn't had much buzz, and after playing it I can really understand why. Engage is a step backwards for the series. I only hope that Nintendo and Intelligent Systems get their act together for the next entry and do a major course correction. Alright, so anyway, have you played Fire Emblem Engage? I'd love to hear your opinion on this game. Go ahead and drop a comment and let me know what you felt. And that'll do it for this video, my current and retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed the video, please toss it a like and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't ever miss any of my videos. If you want to support the work I do here, I've just recently set up channel memberships, or you can hit me up on Patreon or Ko-fi. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.